You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 23. I'm your host, Sarah, with my co-host, Ken Fader. And today, we're discussing inadvertent looting. Are you a looter? Are you sure? Stick around as Ken and I discuss ways to avoid inadvertently looting a site, and what to do if maybe you think you already have. We also discuss different ways to get involved with your archaeological community through citizen science. Get ready to think critically.
Going to the pub when the day is spent. Funny beady blokes you will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, with my co-host, Ken.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you doing?
I'm all right.
All right, and today we are going to discuss basically looting and what not to do, and if you have questions, who to ask. So,
Absolutely.
Ken, what are your experiences with, I want to say it's like unintentional looting is specifically the point. Like, some people just don't understand that they shouldn't pick things up.
You know, my weirdest story about that, Sarah, and this unintentional, I mean, they're intentional looting. People are going out there to steal stuff because they just want to collect it or they want to sell it. That's one thing. But my weirdest story about unintentional looting is when somebody actually called me at my department office to let me know that they had found more stuff at a site I was digging, and they thought I'd be really excited to hear that. So it actually happened. So we're excavating the site. In fact, the site that I talked about in the previous podcast, the lighthouse site.
The lighthouse site?
So we were on TV. There were some newspaper articles, and so it was great. We were getting a lot of publicity, and as a result, people were coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, listen, I'm a descendant. I have some newspaper articles from the 1920s, all good stuff." And then I get this young guy who calls and says, "Oh, that's so interesting." And because I heard about this cool site, we went up there over the weekend, and we've been digging around, and we found stuff, and we were hoping that you could identify what it was. And it was like, "Are you guys kidding me? What?" And they said, no, we were digging up there like we were doing like what you're doing. And we said, "Well, actually, you understand that this is state property. And in order for us to dig, we had to get a permit in order to do this excavation, and everything that we find reverts to the state of Connecticut because it's a state forest."
Right.
They were speechless, Sarah. They had no idea. They were extremely apologetic, and they actually met me at the site and gave me the things they dug up and showed me. And the sad thing was it was one of those bizarre instances in which they really thought they were doing a good thing.
Yeah.
And they looked at they watched the show on, it was TV news.
Yeah.
3-4 minute bit that did on our site. So they didn't have the right equipment. So they went out like to like a toy store and got the kinds of stuff that kids use when they sift beach sand. And that's what they brought to an archaeological site. Now, these were guys who maybe there's a fault. The fault lies there with me, assuming that people know you shouldn't go and dig up an archaeological site. This is not something that an archaeologist would recommend you do. But these guys actually thought they were doing archaeology, and they were helping me out, and they were kind of a part of that the brotherhood, sisterhood of archaeologists. And it blew me away that here these guys were thinking this was a good thing, and yet they were looting a site.
Right. And that's kind of what I want to address, because like you said, if you're a professional looter and you're listening to this podcast, I first question your judgment, and secondly, I can tell you not to loot. I mean, you already know you're looting. It's the people who are unintentionally doing it, people who think they're helping. I was working out at Boxley Cabin in Indiana, in Sheridan, Indiana, and the person who was leading the dig, she was really close with a lot of the locals because they really took to taking care of that site. That was their thing. And one of I guess he was like a local drunk or something. But yeah, he came up to us while we were digging, and he just had these two like buckets, like those heavy duty buckets that you can get at Lowe's. And they were just full of things that he'd just been picking up on at the site during the like 6 months that we were gone between the two seasons. And yeah, he just presented them to her, and man, she, like she tried to be nice about it, but as she kept going through the bucket, you could just see her getting madder and madder and madder.
Sure.
Because it's all good stuff, but it's it's gone now.
Right. Oh, yeah, and
So
the
I mean,
context is gone, and the associations. There is a reason that archaeologists are sort of feel a proprietary interest in the archaeological record. Um, Listen, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a brilliant scientist, but I am trained to excavate and recover material in a way that allows us to kind of maximize the information that's there.
right.
And that if you're not trained in that way, you may think, hey, I'm like doing archaeology, but in fact, you're probably destroying more information than you are recovering. A little side thing here, Sarah. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is, at the end of the day, we may leave artifacts in situ.
Right.
So we are not ready to remove these things
Right.
from the context. We haven't mapped them in yet. We haven't taken out the total station and measured stuff in. Maybe we need better photographs. We're going to clean up the site a little bit. And we may leave those things in situ, and it may be over a weekend, or it may be over a period of time. And we actually had an instance in which somebody arrived at the site on a weekend, and they picked up at least one artifact that we had left in situ, and we found out who did it.
Yeah.
And his reaction was, those dumb archaeologists, they left something there. They didn't even know they had something.
Oh, jeez.
Because, again, not understanding that
Right.
the locations of these things, their spatial associations, is a key part. And that, we're not always, we don't dig like woodchucks.
Right.
We're not ripping stuff. Oh my
Right.
gosh, look what I
Right.
found. We leave these things in place in order to get a better, sometimes broader perspective of what's there in the field.
And
And
sometimes we leave things behind on purpose. Like sometimes, the season's over with, or an area it's just too valuable to dig. We're leaving it alone for a reason.
sure, exactly.
So no, I get very, very nervous leaving open units unattended over the weekends when on the few like phase 3s that I've been on, and the field schools that I've been at. It's like, yeah, both the field schools I was on were protected land, but that doesn't mean people aren't
No, of
coming
course not.
onto
Yeah.
it. And of course with the CRM project, it's a CRM project.
Yeah.
So, you try to get as much out as you can by the end of the day, but sometimes, like you said, you're stuck.
But
You know?
and you don't want to alter your methodology
No.
simply because, well, we've got to leave now and we're afraid to leave these things in place. So
Right.
we're going to take them out of the ground even though we would rather not do that.
Right.
And that's a horrible position for an archaeologist to be in, to say, well, I'm going to lose information if I tear this out of the ground now. I know that. But if I don't tear it out of the ground, it may not be here when I come back on Monday.
Exactly.
And that's sort of tragic. The worst thing, the worst scenario for an archaeologist is, look, it took us years to find this place. It's been in the ground waiting for archaeologists, the
Right.
attention of archaeologists for 5,000 years. And in 2 seconds,
Yeah.
somebody, well-meaning or not, is going to destroy much of the information that's there for us. That's obviously, we feel very strongly about stuff like that.
So let's talk about some basic concepts that people may not be totally familiar with, and one of
Sure.
which being context. Just a lot of people don't, even people who kind of think they know what it means outside of the field of archaeology, don't really understand what it means. Because a lot of people, their only interaction with the term context is, the context of a word in a sentence. And it's like,
Sure.
yes, that's very similar. Like the meaning of a word can change, especially in the English language, can change depending on the context that it's in, the words around it, or the meaning of the sentence. And it's very similar in an archaeological situation, because the importance or even the interpretation the objects or the soil stain or even the landscape can be altered depending on what it's in relation to on the rest of the site. So when people come in and they just kind of grab and go, intentionally or otherwise, it completely changes that, and we can lose data.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely. I have a figure that I drew a rough figure, and then we had a professional illustrator finish it up and for one of my textbooks. And it's the scenario I lay out there is here's a spear point. All right, we're going to talk about this spear point in 5 different instances of association. And
Right.
in one of the drawings, the spear point is actually embedded in the bone of a human being.
Right.
In another scenario, we find the spear point mixed in with a bunch of charcoal and animal bones. And in another scenario, there's a human burial, and the spear point is, along with other spear points, is by the side of the person who's been buried. And I said, each of those cases, the spear point looks exactly the same spear point. But the contexts are entirely different, and therefore the meaning of that spear point, what it was, is entirely different in each case. If all I have is a spear point, I don't know what that spear point necessarily meant, but if I have it in its context, in situ, how it was left by somebody either in a burial, in a scenario where it's a weapon against a person, or in another scenario where it was used at a hunt, those are 3 entirely different reconstructions, and
Right.
without the context, those are all entirely lost.
Exactly.
The analogy, and I realize this is an imperfect analogy, but if you've ever watched any of these the police procedural dramas on TV,
Oh yeah.
and they arrive at the scene of a crime, and you watch as the CSI people, the analysts, try to reconstruct what happened in that crime, and you look at how at them taking photograph after photograph after photograph,
Right.
and you see them drawing out the trajectories of there are the bullet holes in the wall, and the casings are over here, and here are the trajectories. So what they're trying to do is reconstruct that scene of the crime. What was it? I think it's the Agatha Christie detective Hercule Poirot, the French detective.
Poirot, yeah.
And he arrives at the scene, and his iconic phrase is "touch nothing." Because every little bit, every piece is going to conceivably give you another piece of information, another clue about what happened. I've read the Sherlock, the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories.
Oh yeah, even
even
Sherlock was on about it. Yeah.
And yeah, he goes nuts when all the local constabulary, who are not very well trained, have walked over a crime scene, and he can't figure out which footprints belong to who, and the context is it's all destroyed. You can't reconstruct it.
Right.
That's the same thing. I cannot. A criminologist can't reconstruct a crime scene by a bunch of individual items in plastic bags. They
Right.
want to know where are the bullet holes in the wall? Where are the blood spatters? Where are the footprints? Where are the fingerprints on the very, if you take all those things out of context, you cannot reconstruct the crime. And archaeologists are trying to reconstruct the scene. It's not the scene of a crime, but the scene of a life.
Right.
And of course, all of those associations and context are absolutely crucial. And if people go to a site and rip everything out, that's gone.
And just to poke fun at Ken, I would like to point out that
you would not be the first person to do
I just want to point out that your 2 references were like a Victorian era writer and books that were published in like the late 70s.
Oh, probably earlier than that. Yeah, I bet you it was even earlier than that.
No, but
that's okay.
No,
and listen, if you can find a better detective stories than Sherlock Holmes, I want to hear them.
I can't, because I love Sherlock Holmes, and allow me to have a side rant here. I love the fact that Sherlock Holmes was basically the father of modern forensics, and is a fictional character. I just love that a fictional character basically created a field of science.
It's also very important to point out that the irony here is that Arthur Conan Doyle creates the most logical and deductive mind in literature, arguably, and Arthur Conan Doyle believed in fairies and ghosts, and he was an ardent believer in spiritualism, and was a supporter of these two little girls. There was a movie about it years ago, but the true story is that these little girls were faking photographs of fairies in their garden,
Yeah.
and Houdini knew they were faking it, and other scientists knew they were faking it, and Arthur Conan Doyle said, no, 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 those are actual photographs of fairies. So here's the guy who creates this amazing fictional character who's deductive and logical, and who actually there are specific quotes that I can pull out from Sherlock Holmes stories where Holmes is in fact denying the existence of paranormal and spiritual stuff, but yet Conan Doyle was actually quite credulous and gullible about that.
You know, and a lot of writers will tell you, I am not my character. I am not my character. So, you know, I mean, that's Conan Doyle's defense. Also, wasn't the spiritualism later on in his life anyway?
I don't know exactly, but my understanding is that it was, I believe it was his son who was killed during World War I, and he was devastated, and his firm hope and desire was that, in fact, he would be able to contact his son in the other world. And I believe, and I'm not going to make fun of Arthur Conan Doyle at all, but I think that he was grossly taken advantage of by
as many
scam
people.
artists.
As
scam
many
artists.
Yeah,
and that's really pretty sad, because they were promising him that his deceased son, about which he grieved for the rest of his life, Conan Doyle did, that his deceased son was out there in the ether, and that he could communicate with him, and he could have a conversation with him, and they exploited his desire, his grief, and that's shameful.
Yes. Okay, but yes, it was, and let's all have a moment of silence for Mr. Conan Doyle. Actually, Sir Conan Doyle. But let's get back on topic. Talk about context. What's another?
That would be the first time we ever got back on topic after a digression, but that's okay.
We don't digress. We never digress. We just
we elaborate.
We go the long way around the topic. So we got context. What's another really important concept that being misunderstood may lead to unintentional looting?
Well, another thing that I think is similar is that I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple of examples, not necessarily directly related to looting, but it tells the same story. When I was, I did an archaeological field school, went right out of college, in Ohio, at the University of Cincinnati. Kent Vickery, who unfortunately has passed away, was a student of Stu Straver. So Vickery was in that kind of vanguard of, let's save the soil, let's do flotation. We're finding all the stuff that we never thought was there, seed remains and tiny bones, and it was great. And so Kent Vickery was a wonderful mentor and teacher. And while I was there, we're looking, oh my God, it's the early 1970s.
Don't date yourself.
No kidding. I think the site was about 15 minutes old. Not really. But anyway, we got a call, or the lab there at the University of Cincinnati got a call from a developer saying that they believed that they were finding what they thought was a tusk in a pit that they were digging up with their heavy equipment. And a number of Vickery's graduate students went to check it out, and in fact, it was a mastodon tusk, highly weathered. It was kind of falling apart, but it definitely was a mastodon.
Yeah.
And they arrived and the developer said, "Listen, if you want, we'll let you dig this up." And the protection laws were a lot different back in the 1970s.
Yeah, they were.
So the deal was that, in fact, the developer, the contractor, was being very generous. And so the team arrived with the standard archaeological toolkit. So little brushes and screens and dental picks, and they start removing the stuff. And these construction guys, of course, they come over and they're shaking their heads, going, "Guys, that's going to take you forever. Listen, we'll give you a backload. We'll give you a
backhoe.
A backhoe, and we'll have it out for you in 10 minutes." And of course, the archaeologist said, "No, you don't understand. stratigraphy here, the layering in the soil, where something comes from in 3 dimensions is absolutely crucial. And these guys were nice enough to walk away thinking these crazy archaeologists
Yeah,
would have
right.
this out instantly. And that's the fact of the matter is when somebody comes to my archaeological site, they're looking at an excavation unit that's 2 meters by 2 meters, and maybe at this point it's a meter down. And
Right.
they ask me, so did you do that today?
Yeah.
I said, no, that's 5 weeks of work on the part of those two people. And they say, are you crazy? What? Can't you just take shovels and dig that stuff up? And I think that's one of the problems, especially with folks who believe they're being helpful,
Right.
is that, we really don't, we use shovels to fill in the holes. We may use shovels in a phase 1 survey where we're doing test pitting, but after that, the shovels go away. We're removing soil in very, very small, thin layers because, again, the location of everything. In order for me to date 2 parts of a site, I might need very precise measurements of exactly which stratigraphic layer
Right.
those materials came from. And if you show up with a shovel and start digging, say, well, it's like a treasure hunt. Archaeology is not a treasure hunt. It's a
Yeah.
lot more like detective work. And so I think, again, that this misapprehension that why do you think, about why it's so meticulous, why we're so slow? It's not because we're not hard workers. It's because we understand excavating an archaeological site is a destructive activity.
Right.
We are destroying the site,
Right.
and we want to destroy it in a way where we are so careful and meticulous in how we destroy it and recording everything
Right.
that by the time we're done, we still have a very, very clear notion of where everything was in relation to everything else, and the precise levels from which every item was recovered.
Okay, and we're going to go to break real quick, and when we come back, we will further this exact discussion.
Hello everyone, Chris Webster here from the Archaeology Podcast Network, and we're giving away an iPad Mini 4 to one of our listeners. The iPad Mini 4 came out in September. It's a 16 gigabyte space gray iPad with AT&T cellular ready antenna. All that means is it comes with GPS. You do not need to get a data plan. And you don't even need to be on AT&T if you never get a plan to get a data plan. It just has GPS. It also has a fingerprint sensor and Apple Pay ready and all the good perks that come with that. So it's a good iPad. We use them in the field. There are 2 easy ways to enter. 1, do a Profiles in CRM interview before December 15th, 2015, or recommend someone for an interview. You'll both get an entry once the interview is posted. If you want to know more about Profiles in CRM, go to www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/profiles. All the questions are listed right there. The other way to enter is to like the APN Facebook page and share it with your friends on Facebook to get the word out about our awesome podcasts. The winner will be announced December 16th, 2015 at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So get your entries in, send me those emails for people that want to do the Profiles in CRM podcast, and good luck to everyone. iMac, take us out with a binary solo.
And we're back, and we're going to continue talking about basically inadvertent looting and basic concepts of archaeology that might, with a better understanding, help you prevent inadvertent looting. Building on what you said before the break, Ken, I think another thing that people don't completely understand is the amount of paperwork that we do. And that
Absolutely.
certain parts of the paperwork have to be done at certain times of the excavation, or again, all of that information is lost. Like you were saying, the excavation itself is can be total destruction of a site. And so, we, even with the modern technology that we've got, which I love the hell out of, we got color photos and black and white photos and the ability to actually record the position of an artifact in actual 3 dimensions directly onto a computer nowadays. It's great to have all of that, but we still got to have the age-old fallback of paperwork where things are noticed. You notice things about the soil, the texture, the color, the this, the that, something else, like the position of the artifact itself. Like, is it on its side? Is it laying flat? These are things that the total station's not necessarily going to pick up. I'm sure it can if used properly, but yeah, and again, if you just show up and you just start digging holes, you see who can dig the fastest hole down to 2 meters, you're gonna lose all of that.
Yeah. One of the things that drives me, I mean, I lose. Am I allowed to say I lose my shit, or is Chris gonna cut that out? I tell you what, Chris, I lose my shit when I see a student in my field school who has gone out there. We use Ziploc storage bags. So somebody's excavating a quadrant of a 1 meter square. They're excavating 5 centimeters, and I tell them again and again and again, before you start digging, with a Sharpie, with a permanent marker, mark on this bag
Oh God,
the
yes.
site name, the unit name, the quadrant name, the stratigraphic level, the date, and your name.
Label
And
your
when
damn bags.
and here's the deal. And I'll walk over to somebody and I'll see them putting artifacts in an unlabeled bag.
Yep.
And I say, I'm going to take the trowel and I'm going to stab you with this trowel. Because here's what happens, and they don't believe me. They think, "Oh, I'll remember."
Mental
I've got a
note:
bag
don't
here,
be
I'll
one of
remember.
Ken's field students.
No, no, you can be one of my field students, but God damn it,
He will
write
stab
the
you.
information on the Ziploc storage bag. Because when we go back to the lab and we're going through, we've got a day bag, so all the material from
Right.
that day goes in that bag, and I pull out. It happens every field season. I pull out a Ziploc bag with artifacts in it, and there's nothing written on the bag.
Yep.
And I say, I really do. I mean, I don't know that I've ever made anybody cry, but I get extremely angry.
Oh, I wager you've made someone cry.
See, here's the deal. I get it. These kids are passionate about this. They're excited. They want to start the actual process on a given morning. We're out there. It was really cool yesterday, and I want to get back to the actual excavation.
Right.
And they don't want to take the 2 minutes it would take. They want to take those 2 minutes to write that information on the bag, and then they forget about it, and somebody else picks it up, and we get back, and then I literally have to go from person to person. Do you recognize these flint flakes?
Yep.
Because otherwise, this is garbage, right? I'm exaggerating. I don't. I tell them it's garbage. It's not really.
My field director told me that when I was in school, we had a whole bag of bags that came in with no labels. And yeah, I mean, she did. She pulled them all out. She laid them all.
Frustrated.
She laid them all on the table, and she's like, "This is trash. I'm just going to throw it away. This means nothing to anyone." Fortunately, it was really just a bunch of flint flakes, so nothing important was truly lost. But the point was made.
Right.
It's useless. It's absolutely useless.
And that's if we're that obsessive that we are absolutely denigrating and belittling people who haven't written something on a bag. You can understand how you show up with a shovel and you just figure, I'm going to dig a bunch of stuff up because it's like a treasure hunt. How angry and how frustrating that is to us.
Yeah, the only difference is I'm probably going to be nicer to your face because you didn't know any better.
Perhaps.
Yeah,
perhaps.
The dude who's in school or doing the CRM job with me should probably know better. Yeah, people always look at me funny when I label, because I always label my bags. I'll have like a bag or two ahead. I'd rather throw a bag out because it's got too much it's got the wrong information on it than put stuff into a blank bag.
But you can imagine, you again, this stuff has been in the ground. Maybe it's 500 years, maybe it's 10,000 years, and now we are privileged in being able to recover this material, and we want to maximize the amount of information we can gather from this.
Yeah.
And to go back into a lab and have a bag of stuff. That's not archaeology, okay? We have failed. Whoever, we as a group or that individual has failed, and we want to avoid that kind of failure because that's an epic fail for an archaeologist.
Yeah.
But again, that shows how important, how seriously we take, as you say, the paperwork, the reams of paperwork.
Yeah.
That we maintain in order to minimize the amount of actual destruction we do to the data that is at the core, at the heart of what our research is all about.
Yeah. I mean, I can think back to the last field school I was on, just the binders worth of paperwork, and I can understand your frustration because, you know, you're constantly dealing with students who are learning. And I mean, you don't, at least in my opinion, you don't want to be too hard on students. I mean, you want to be hard on them because you don't want them to screw up when they get out into the real world, but you don't want to be so hard on them that they're like rage quitting your class. But at the same time, like, you know, I had to create a poster based off of data that other people had collected from their sites, from their units. And this was my second field school after being in CRM for a while. So it's like I felt like I was an old hat at it. I could be just, you know, blowing my own smoke. But, you know, I'm going back over the paperwork from the students who this is their first field school. And I'm just like, this is useless. You know, there's coordinates are missing. There's no thumbnail sketch. There's no notes. There's just numbers. You know, it's like, what did you do? You know, and it's useless information to me. Whereas a well done dig, you should be able to take the paperwork and lay it out linearly. You know, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and you should be able to know what that unit looked like by simply reading the paper layer by layer.
Yeah, you should be able to reconstruct
Yeah.
in 3 dimensions what that site was
Exactly.
before you excavated it.
Right, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with the inadvertent looting. People see something and they pick it up and they don't record where it goes, where it came from. Even something as simple as, you know, just writing in a date book or on a little note card, hey, I found this at this location, you know, hiking in the woods in Fort Bend. You know, that's more helpful than nothing. I mean, it's still probably going to make the item useless, but at least you tried.
But it's one of the things that I've run into a lot. There's a happy ending to the story. And I'm sure you've done this too, Sarah, is to talk to local people who have artifact collections.
Yeah.
And these are folks who don't dig, but they usually are picking up artifacts in plowed fields. So
yeah, they're surface collecting.
Yeah. So obviously these things are not in situ. They're not in their original locations.
Right.
But so often what will happen is they collect from a wide number of fields kind of across the state.
Right.
And then when I get to see these collections, and these are nice folks and they're more than happy to share, they're proud of their artifacts.
Yeah.
And I look at them and it's like, well, where did this one come from? And their answer is, well, Connecticut. And
right.
So, but that's not really, I'd like to know more accurately where this came from. And they go, well, I don't know. It's someplace in Connecticut, because they just put all the stuff in the same bucket.
Or it's something they've inherited from their grandparents.
Exactly. I've actually when I was in Ohio, Kent Vickery took us to a very nice local collector, Sarah. The guy was a sweetheart. But what he did was he took all of the spear points and he made them into kind of mosaics.
Okay.
So
yeah, I've seen stuff like that. Yeah.
To God, Sarah, there was an American flag made out of arrowheads, nice. Where the white stripes, the red stripes were like a jasper or a red shirt, and the white stars were quartz, and the blue background was like a blue flint. And you walk into this guy's garage, and he was really proud of it, and you kind of felt like standing up and saluting, but that was of limited value archaeologically, because we didn't know where any of those individual things came from.
Right.
Now, when I was I've been working here in the Farmington Valley in Connecticut for years and years and years, and at some point somebody told me, oh, there's this guy, Mark Banks. And Mark he works over at SK Lavery, which was an appliance store. But like in all his spare time, he goes out and looks for artifacts in plowed fields. And I thought, all right, great. I'll go look at this. And Sarah, I went into this guy's basement, and it was like walking into the Smithsonian.
Nice.
He had built shelves. This guy had no background. His degree, his bachelor's degree had been in psychology. Nice. He had shelves. He had bought little containers from Home Depot, and every artifact was labeled. He had his own system of recording, but he had reams of books. And if you picked up anything of the thousands of artifacts he had, you picked one up, he could tell you exactly where he found it, in what field, in what town, what day he found it, other artifacts that he found around it. I said, you know what, Mark? You ought to take a class in archaeology, because you're obviously really good at this. Mark Banks now has a PhD in anthropology
Nice.
and has his own CRM firm here in Connecticut.
Good for
So
him.
he took this really seriously. So don't get me wrong. There are people out there, especially surface collectors, who are not disturbing intact archaeological sites,
No.
who do good work and are sharing the information with people. And we don't want to discourage people who have an interest in archaeology. And somebody like Mark Banks ends up becoming a professional archaeologist.
Right.
But that's different. It's if in that case he was doing the kind of work that a professional archaeologist would do, and he kind of discovered that on his own and through his reading, and that was good stuff.
Now, see, you don't want to discourage that kind of behavior. Mark Banks being an exception to all that.
Right.
I do, as a CRM, as someone who's predominantly done CRM, where most of our work is phase 1. So it's all walking survey and, digging random holes. The problem with the surface collectors, no, they're not disturbing an intact site, but they are erasing any evidence of the site on the surface. And so when phase 1 people, when CRM people come through to do a phase 1, there's no evidence of these sites.
Gotcha.
And so what's happening is we're missing sites because we're not catching them because all of the stuff's gone. And then you'll go into town, after a day of walking fields for 10 hours, and you'll go to the local bar and you'll run into, the guys who have been collecting that field for generations, and they've got all these boxes full of all this cool shit. And you're like, well, that would have been nice to find, and it's not just like you're bitter. At least for me, it's not just because I'm bitter that I didn't find something cool out in the field. It's, I kind of see CRM as like the first layer of defense against people who want to, CRM usually comes in when somebody wants to build something. And a lot of times we're like surveying for roads or pipelines and things that people don't want in their backyards. And, I can't help you if I can't find a site.
Yeah, I mean, let's at least agree that we should divide these folks into 2 categories. One category are the real acquisitive types who, for them, they're not going to share anything with anybody. So if they've got a place, it's like the guy who has a fishing hole and doesn't want anybody else to go there.
Right.
So there are guys like that for sure who they're going to keep mum about the places where they go and find arrowheads by walking the plowed field.
Right.
And those, I have no sympathy. I don't. That's not a good thing. But there are people who, in a way, they can be used as kind of that first line of, we go into an area, listen, there's a pipeline going to go through here. It's going to go through this plowed field. And if they tell you, oh, there's a guy who has an agreement with the landowner, and he walks the plowed field after the first plowing in the spring and after a rainfall, but he's more than happy to show you what he's got. I think that's better than the folks who they're not going to tell anybody because that's their own bailiwick, their own private place where they pick up arrowheads.
And I mean, yeah, there's a difference between like the helpful informant and the guy who's trying to keep mum. And I'd rather have the helpful informant over the guy who's trying to keep mum. But in all honesty, I'd rather not have either. And I'm not trying to be mean. I mean, I know
I get you.
People are learning. It's a learned behavior. It's passed down through the family. I mean, it's a tradition kind of thing. But the thing is, we're in the modern era now. We could take pictures. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone, and all cell phones have cameras on them, unless you've got like a Cricket because you're, old. But it's so much nicer for us if we can get out there and find something and then be like, hey, there's a possible site here. Maybe we should do some more investigation into it. And a lot of times, this is the other thing that people don't know about CRM work. A lot of companies don't want to pay for the phase 2 and the phase 3 survey. So a lot of times, if you find something on a phase 1 survey and you deem it significant, which is not every site, but enough, the company will just reroute. It's cheaper for them to reroute than it is for them to pay for the digs to remove the site.
That's also a time thing too. I mean, even if the expense is very close, or even if it's cheaper to do the archaeology is not going to get done overnight. It's
Right.
easier to redesign and quicker to redesign
Yeah.
than to wait for 6 weeks while archaeologists are doing a thorough, careful job
I wish I got
investigation.
6 weeks, but yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Usually it's like, hey, you got 2 weeks, go. Yeah, that's gonna happen. But yeah, no, that's a whole other conversation, right there.
Let me get back, since we're talking about this, to kind of steer us a little bit back to our theme of kind of archaeological fantasies. In doing an archaeological survey where, in fact, I was directed to a number of people who had artifact collections.
Right.
And that over the years, they had walked plowed fields. And for some reason, I don't know if this is universally the case, but everywhere here in Connecticut, they keep their arrowhead collections in old cigar boxes. Why cigar boxes? I don't know.
That's a thing.
Maybe that's a thing. But anyway, so I'm going through, and there's all the standard stuff. A lot of arrow points and broken pieces of pottery. And in the middle of this cigar box, Sarah, there was an Egyptian scarab.
Oh, you've talked about this, yeah.
Scarabs. And it's like, oh my God, And yes, I go, where'd you get that from? I don't know. I picked it up someplace. And now, again, context is all important. In fact, a bunch of arrowheads in a cigar box, even if you tell me, I think it came from that town or that field, it's not, the chain of evidence has been broken.
Exactly.
And certainly with the scarab, where did that come from? Could somebody find that scarab and say, oh my God, ancient Egyptians were in South Windsor, Connecticut, because that's where the scarab was found.
Right.
Which does remind me, I think of something I've talked about in a previous podcast, just as an example of how important context is, where the editor of Ancient American Magazine,
with this oil lamp,
had this oil lamp, and he said, well, this oil lamp was he bought it at a tag sale, or another person bought it at a tag sale in Virginia or West Virginia. That artifact is absolutely and thoroughly and completely devoid of context.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea where that came from. I don't. Because it wasn't excavated. We don't have photographs of it in situ, in a stratigraphic layer, in the soil, with a little board behind it indicating how many centimeters below datum that was and the direction you're looking in. And without that, it's just a really cool object. And we have and to use an object like that as in an attempt to prove that ancient people from the Middle East were in Virginia is a fool's errand. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd is the only way to describe that.
Yeah, but they'll take that limb any day, though, won't they?
They do. I mean, it's diagnostic of fringe archaeology.
Yeah.
To pick up something and say, aha,
right.
This proves something or whatever. But that's the problem. I had, honest to God, Sarah, looking through a private collection, and again, this is because of lack of context, lack of keeping records.
Mm-hmm.
The gentleman was as well-meaning as you can possibly imagine.
Right, and they usually are.
And in the middle, what he had done is he had taken, I don't know if it was a piece of plywood or masonite, I don't remember, and what he had done is he had affixed using some like a sticky wax. He had affixed these to the board so he could display it in his basement. They all look really nice. And in the middle of now, this is Connecticut, right?
Right.
We have igneous rocks in Connecticut. It's all basalt. We do not have volcanoes in Connecticut that produce obsidian.
Right.
The nearest source of obsidian to us, where I'm sitting right here, I think is Wyoming.
Oh, wow.
Wyoming is not anywhere near Connecticut.
Right.
Yet in the middle of this board, where he had the artifacts that were part of his collection, was an obsidian spear point.
Nice.
No doubt, it was obsidian. And when I asked him, well, where did that come from? He couldn't tell me.
Yeah.
It was only later that I found out that he was among a group of guys who traded these things, like baseball cards, so that if he had a really nice Normanskill flint point, he could trade it with somebody in Montana who had where obsidian. There's obsidians everywhere, but they don't have that really nice blue flint that we have here near the Hudson Valley. So these guys are trading these things. Can you imagine an archaeologist finding a collection whatever the context, and finding stuff from, holy God, they've got artifacts from Montana here. We've got evidence of long distance trade. I had a geology prof in grad school, who was a Bob Black, incredibly a brilliant man, a sweetheart of a guy, and a real expert on glaciers. And he told me once that he had hitched a ride with like a Navy pilot on Antarctica. He had to go from one base to another. And while this guy's got a bag, the pilot has a bag of rocks in the plane, and Black said, I mean, he's a geologist. He goes, the guy doesn't know he's a geologist, he just knows he's a scientist. And he says, why do you have this bag of rocks? And he said, I hate geologists, and wherever I fly in the world, I pick up rocks, and then whenever I fly elsewhere, I leave the rocks behind. So I've got these are rocks from Italy. I'm going to put them at the South Pole, and some geologist is going to find this stuff, and it's going to drive him crazy.
Oh my God!
Well,
how specific!
Isn't that crazy? But that's a problem without having detailed and accurate records for everything.
Which is not giving people. Please don't take that as an idea, and don't do that.
No, don't do that. That's not funny. It's not a cool idea.
So not funny. Okay, so we're gonna take our final break. And when we come back, we're going to come up with some suggestions for people a way for them to avoid inadvertently looting the site.
The Archaeology and Ale podcast presents a monthly series of lectures on all aspects of archaeology. These lectures are part of the Archaeology in the City program, hosted by the University of Sheffield in England, and are held at the Red Deer pub near the end of the month. The podcast can be heard a few days later. Check out the Red Deer if you're in the area, or find this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back, and can we've talked about, we've talked about context, we've talked about paperwork, we've talked about, not field walking, or at least being generous if you are a field walker.
Yeah, there you go.
What are some suggestions we can give people to keep them, you're out and about and you find something. See, this is my view. You're out and about and you find something on a hike and you're like, ooh, that's cool. Instead of picking it up, I would suggest taking your phone out and taking a picture. You can even flip it over and take a picture of both sides. Just leave it where you found it. And then, if you're really feeling generous, I don't know, email your state archaeologist. Every state's got one, I think. Just email them and see what they think.
Yeah, I mean, what you're suggesting is exactly what National Park Service suggests.
Yeah.
If you're on National Park Service land, if you're hiking wherever you are, if it may be a National Historic Landmark, maybe a place like Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde, or it may be a place that is not known for archaeological resources, but there are still those kinds of things there.
Yeah.
The thing they say is don't pick anything up, photograph it. If you're concerned that other people going to see it and pick it up, cover it with leaves, make sure you've got a good indication of where it is, and then report it to the rangers.
Yeah.
If you're in Park Service land, say, hey, look, we saw this. We want to make sure that that nobody steals it, nobody takes it away, and in those cases, very often the rangers will show up. They will record it. They'll get a GPS coordinates and they'll bring it back to a museum because they know that if 100 people pass that by, 99 people may be responsible and leave it in place, but the 100th person is going to want to
pick it up and run with it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and with the modern phones, especially people who have the really high tech phones, you can geotag your pictures,
right?
Which means
yeah, exactly.
They may not be as accurate as a total station or a GPS unit, but they're accurate within a certain range. So you could even take it one step further, and the picture that you take, grab the coordinates from that picture after you've taken it and give it to your local authorities, or your local archaeological authorities. So please probably don't give a crap. But I mean, if you were to take that step, it actually elevates you from being like random person who saw a cool thing to being a citizen scientist. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's ideal. If everyone acted as a citizen scientist, then we'd have no problems.
And to look at this from the other perspective as well, Sarah, if in fact you elect to pick the thing up, put it in your pocket, and bring it home, you are actually a criminal. You have violated
Right.
a federal law. You are in violation of the American Antiquities Act and later iterations of that act. And they can arrest you for having those things. Two brief stories. One is
Yeah, I was gonna say
um,
I've got a good one on that too.
I was at the edge of the Cedars, which is a beautiful park, I believe in it must be Utah. Anyway, and it's a beautiful pueblo there, and great museum, um, and one of the exhibits, it may not be a current exhibit, but I remember seeing an exhibit there years ago, was about the federal authorities tracking down looters. And in one case, they actually did it with DNA.
No.
They found that the
Wow.
person who was looting the site, and I'm not going to say what it was because I don't want to help people out,
Right.
but something was left behind at the site that the FBI was called in. They recovered material that had DNA, and they were able to identify who that person was. And that person went to prison.
Yeah.
Some of the laws about looting sites, some of the same um, punishments that they apply to drug dealers
Oh
are
wow.
applied to looters. What that means is if you are like a real big looter and you've got like earth moving equipment, they will confiscate that equipment. Like if you're a drug lord and you're flying in drugs with a plane, they'll confiscate your plane.
Yeah.
If to access the site you needed a big 4-wheel SUV and that's how you access the site, they will confiscate that vehicle if you were using it as part of this criminal act to loot a site.
They'll
So
probably just confiscate your car. I mean,
just don't do it.
yeah, and that's the other end of it. I mean, we just right before I left Indiana, we just had this huge kerfluffle where this I think he was 93, honestly, and he had been collecting stuff forever.
Right, sure.
And the FBI finally got wind of him and they descended upon his house. Like, it was weird. No one knew really what was going on. There were that many FBI agents there, and they put up all these like biohazard tents and everything because the stuff that guy had was so old it was disintegrating.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah, so and he had like potential human remains and things. I mean, it was crazy. But yeah,
Cool, yeah.
they were negotiating what they were going to do to this guy because he was 93. What are you going to do? Give him a life sentence? Anything over a year is a life sentence.
Right, sure.
You know? So, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are. I want to say the reality of the situation is if you've just got a couple few artifacts on hand, probably nothing bad's going to happen to you, especially since, you're probably not bragging about it everywhere you go. But it's still just kind of it destroys the scientific record.
Right.
And it's kind of a selfish thing. You're destroying the scientific record for your own pleasure. If you're okay with that, then there's nothing I'm going to say from this point forward that's going to change your opinion.
Yeah, it's not going to change it.
Yeah, but if you've never realized that you were doing that, maybe reconsider it next time. And instead of destroying it, kind of contribute to it, A lot of people, what they don't understand too is if a large site, if you find something and it turns out to be significant, even if it doesn't turn out to be significant, a lot of archaeologists will give tours of their sites these days, the phase 3s and the phase 2s. You can get a tour of them as long as it's not like a private thing, which unfortunately a lot of CRM jobs are.
Right.
But, the last 2 field schools I was on, we had people constantly coming to the site and we were giving tours. Anyway.
The last thing I wanted to say, Sarah, is that we're a show that, thematically, this is a skeptical podcast. And
Sure.
so I don't want to tell anybody that if you steal stuff from an archaeological site, you're going to be plagued by bad karma. But I'll tell you this.
Plagued by bad karma.
Sarah, have you ever...
not saying I'm putting a curse on you.
Well, no, listen. The Park Service is really smart about this. Have you ever been to the Petrified National Forest, which is in Arizona? When you walk in to their museum from, I think, the north entrance, you go into this room that is filled with glass cases. And when I first went in, what is this about? And they were pieces of petrified rock. And along with each piece of petrified wood is a letter that somebody sent to the director or the head ranger of the petrified forest. And I started reading these letters, and they're terrifying. It's you're told when you walk in, don't pick anything up. This all belongs. You need to keep these geological specimens here. If you want a petrified wood, go outside of the forest. You can go buy some, and it's really cheap. Don't. If everybody picked up a piece of petrified wood, after a while there'd be nothing left. And so apparently there is a common belief that there is a curse on people who steal petrified wood. And so all of these letters, Sarah, is people are writing, honest to God, dear director of the Petrified Forest, had I known there was a curse, I never would have picked this up. When I picked this up in 1958, ever since then, my life has been a total disaster. I've lost my job. I don't talk to my children anymore. I've become an alcoholic.
That's so sad.
And, no lie. And please accept this and remove the curse. And it's letter after letter after letter. Now, the folks, the administrators of the Petrified Forest say right up front, we're not telling you that this is going to happen. But, it's better to be safe than sorry, perhaps. And,
I need to see this room. I need to see this now.
Yeah, you know what I'm going to do? I actually took photographs of a couple of the letters. I will send those to you. And it's kind of like, and it's clearly an effort on the part of the administrators there to say, hey, look, if there is this myth or if there is this superstition, what the hell? We're going to take advantage of it. And if a handful of people say, you know what, you better not pick anything up because look at what happened. Look at the bad stuff that happened to these people. Well, then that little exhibit has earned its keep.
Right.
So no, Sarah, I'm not telling people that if they pick up artifacts and illegally pocket them, that anything really bad's going to happen to them. I don't know that that's true, but you never know, right?
This is true. You don't know why that artifact's there. It could have been placed there to, prevent a curse. It could be there to actually curse something. I mean, you don't know why that artifact's there. You should probably just take a picture and leave it there.
Listen, we excavated this beautiful cache of blades. This is in Connecticut, and a number of people have asked me, well, do you feel badly about it? Because clearly these things were put there in that hole 1,600 years ago for a reason. I then say, listen, I'm not a superstitious person, so I don't believe that there's any, evil thing out there that's going to affect me because we dug this up. However, the fact that we found this at all is the result of so many contingencies that shouldn't have happened.
Right.
That if you want to be superstitious, it's pretty clear I was directed to this site to dig it up. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but, I think there's an equally valid argument that I was meant to excavate that cache. As that argument is equally valid to one that's, well, wow, that people put that down there 1,600 years ago for a reason, and now you're upsetting, the balance.
You're also destroying your own argument.
Yes.
You're destroying your argument about the cursed.
There you go.
Cursed wood.
So,
but, so yeah, I'm a big advocate for citizen scientists. People who are not trained scientists helping out scientists who are, and I'm a big advocate for that, especially with the high-tech world that we live in nowadays. It's super easy to do, emails everywhere, everyone's got a phone. Also, if you think about it, you don't have to worry about storing these things after you find them. You've got the picture forever.
Right.
So, I think that's more convenient. Other ways that you could not loot but still be involved with the archaeological process is volunteering your time with your local museums, with your local colleges and stuff. And I don't mean just going and being the person that takes tickets. A lot of them will use lay people for labor on especially phase ones and on excavations to sift dirt and look for artifacts in the back dirt. Which, I mean, can be really fun. It can be really fun for somebody who, didn't do that for their entire field school. So, I mean, you should definitely go give it a try. One of the best days I ever had was working with a CRM group where we got a bunch of locals together and we field walked a field right after a rain.
Mhm.
And these people were like part of the local. There's actually amateur archaeologist groups out there. Um, Most states have one, and yeah, it was the local amateur archaeologists who came out and helped us out with that. And crap, some of them have been walking fields longer than I have.
There are lots of
So
ways to become engaged in archaeological pursuits, and
yeah,
and absolutely, one way of doing it is visiting publicly controlled archaeological sites. Hey, listen, when you go out and hike a trail in Three Rivers in Tularosa, New Mexico, and photograph rock, all these thousands of pieces of rock art and look for them
yeah,
among the boulders, you're doing exactly, in a way, fundamentally what the archaeologists have done, which is finding, identifying, recording. So and you do that without touching the rock art panels, without bringing anything home. But you're right,
right.
Sarah. You got a photograph that's going to last forever, and you can put it on you use it as the wallpaper on your computer, and you have in that
Or for
way,
your icon picture.
yeah, you've you've involved yourself in doing archaeology, and the common phrase that they use right in the environmental movement is what take all leave only footprints and take only pictures, and that's absolutely the same um, theme applies in
Yeah,
archaeology.
yeah, because once it's gone, it's gone.
You got it.
There's no getting it back.
And like I think you mentioned a term, it's a non-renewable resource. Perhaps the deal here is there are a finite number of Paleo-Indian sites. There are a finite
Yeah,
number of terminal archaic sites here in the East. There are a finite number of basket maker sites. And when the last one of those is looted, there are no more being made. They're gone
yeah,
forever. It's like an
yeah.
extinct species.
So yeah, end of the deal. Non-renewable resource. Don't loot. If you have questions, contact your state archaeologist. Send us a question. We'll try to field it. And
Perfect.
yeah, thanks for recording with us, Ken.
Absolutely. All right. Good night, Sarah.
All right. Night.
Dinosaurs, raise your trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archifantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archifantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at archifantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. Thanks again for listening.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.